In a world of magic and monsters, a blonde-haired warrior in a red uniform found herself in a desperate struggle against a monstrous, wolf-like beast. Beside her, a pink-haired companion with a staff cried out in alarm as the creature lunged. It was a chaotic scene, yet a voice echoed, revealing a profound truth. The blonde warrior, once an ordinary salaryman and anime enthusiast, had been reborn into this fantastical realm. This new existence placed her within the game world of Lovely Sorcerer, a place she knew intimately. Despite the grand title, the true protagonist of this new life, a male, declared his intention to rise from a mere background character to become the strongest, striving for power on his own terms. He stood ready, clad in a distinguished white and gold uniform, his dark hair framing piercing green eyes, as he embraced his role as a mob character within this vibrant, magical world. As the battle raged, he moved with swift precision, deflecting an attack aimed at the blonde warrior. He then turned to both her and her pink-haired companion, inquiring about their well-being before confidently asserting that he would handle the recovery, demonstrating a surprising command over the situation. They gathered together, the male protagonist gesturing as he began to recount the origins of their current predicament, pondering exactly when this extraordinary journey had truly begun. He recalled that it was approximately half a year prior when he first encountered the romantic action RPG known as Lovely Sorcerer, or simply Lovesor, as it was more commonly called. The game had been an immense success, shining brightly within the declining eroge industry, consistently achieving impressive sales year after year. True to its nature as a romantic action RPG, it boasted a combat system that was a rare and valuable find in such games. His passion for the game grew so intense that he eventually started running a dedicated strategy site for it. He would often find himself at his computer, meticulously updating the site and offering advice to fellow players, such as how to execute a stun lock. He observed the lively comments section, noting the excitement of the commenters who were eager for updates and often referred to him by his online alias, Atlas. He sat at his desk, phone in hand, contemplating the nature of games. He mused that no matter how godly a game might be, one would eventually grow bored and dissatisfied. He continued his internal monologue, lamenting that the combat in his current game had become formulaic, wishing the characters could move with more freedom. Leaning back in his chair, he glanced at his phone, which displayed a list of uncompleted trophies for Lovely Sorcerer. He considered these remaining tasks to be plain and tedious. Despite his weariness, he clapped his hands to his face, forcing a laugh as he admonished himself, declaring he wasn't done yet and needed to pull himself together. His phone screen showed the game, Lovely Sorcerer, still active, with the time progressing from 3.13 to 0.30. He internally wished he could keep playing, determined to acquire all the trophies. Exhausted, he eventually lay in bed, still dressed in a shirt and tie, his arm draped over his eyes, his phone resting beside him. As the morning light filtered in, his hand twitched on the soft bedding. He stirred, a faint thump escaping him, wondering what time it was as the chirping of birds reached his ears. He slowly opened his eyes, his gaze falling upon an unfamiliar ceiling adorned with a canopy. He blinked, questioning if what he saw was truly a canopy, utterly bewildered. Sitting upright, he noticed the elaborate, laced shirt he was wearing and the luxurious bedding. He realized with a jolt that his own room was never this opulent. He looked around the unfamiliar surroundings, his eyes scanning a richly detailed bedside table. He pondered if he had simply gone to bed after gaming, or if he had somehow ended up overseas. He pondered his situation, wondering if he had been kidnapped. The opulent room offered no immediate answers to his confusion. He approached the ornate door, his hand reaching for the handle. A soft clack echoed as he opened it, realizing he needed to venture outside to truly understand his whereabouts. As he stepped into the hallway, a young maid, startled by his sudden appearance, cried out his name, Hermes Sama. She questioned why he was standing in front of the door, her expression shifting to confusion and then dismay as he asked who Hermes was. The maid, now identified as Fran, began to weep, reminding him that just yesterday, he had called out to her normally. Her distress was palpable as she repeated her name, "It's Fran." Fran continued to cry, unable to comprehend why he was speaking to her so formally and why he couldn't remember her. She recounted a carriage accident from the previous week, though she insisted he had been fine until yesterday. He, however, felt no connection to her words, internally noting that she didn't seem like a kidnapper. Overwhelmed, Fran tearfully explained that he was Hermes von Lunicilia, the Duke's son, and that he had suddenly lost his memories. He could only repeat the title, the Duke's son, finding the revelation too much to bear, even as a cruel joke. A sudden, sharp pain shot through his head, causing him to clutch it in agony and stumble back into the room. Fran, still standing at the doorway, cried out in alarm, asking if he was all right. He stumbled towards a large mirror, his eyes widening as he beheld his reflection. A face with features so delicate they might appear feminine to some, yet so flawlessly beautiful that even he, a man, felt captivated. He tentatively greeted the stranger, staring back. Staring at his reflection, a profound realization struck him. He had become incredibly handsome. The headache intensified, overwhelming him with a torrent of fragmented memories and visions. He saw himself, or rather, Hermes, in various situations, being tended to by Fran after an accident, interacting with the game's female protagonist and companion, and even a glimpse of his past self from his original world. The sheer volume of information and the clash of identities caused him immense distress, leaving him clutching his head and questioning how this could have happened. He grappled with a sudden, vivid memory, a fleeting glimpse of the Triceratops kingdom. He questioned if this vision belonged to him or to Hermes, the handsome young man whose body he now inhabited. The memory intensified, revealing itself as a page from a game magazine, Lovely Sorcerer, detailing a community event in the Triceratops kingdom. He recognized the game, a title he had meticulously followed, ensuring he knew every detail. A profound realization dawned upon him, his eyes widening in disbelief as he touched his own face, the implications of the memory becoming clear. The world outside, with its soaring birds and distant mountains, seemed to confirm his impossible thought. He had been reincarnated. He had been reborn into the very world of Lovely Sorcerer, a sprawling city nestled amidst majestic peaks, a place he knew intimately from his past life. Overwhelmed with joy and disbelief, he threw his arms wide, exclaiming that he could not fathom how such a fantastical, light novel-like plot had become his reality. As the initial euphoria subsided, a more somber thought emerged. If this was indeed a second chance, there was a strong possibility he had died from overworking in his previous life. He then wondered if this extraordinary turn of events was what people referred to as the grace of another world's god. He gazed at his reflection, a handsome young man, and pondered the unfortunate truth. This body belonged to Hermes von Lunicilia, a boy he did not recognize, suggesting he had been reincarnated not as a hero, but as a mere background character. He concluded that there was no point in dwelling on the past or searching for answers regarding his reincarnation, as it was an unchangeable reality. He resolved to simply accept things as they were. He apologized to Fran, sensing her wary gaze, as if she found his sudden change in demeanor suspicious. He then realized she was still observing him from the doorway, her expression one of shock and concern. She gasped, questioning if his memory had truly lapsed for a moment. He, however, covered his face, claiming his memory had indeed lapsed, but was now fully restored. Despite his assertion, she reminded him that it had been a week since his accident, and after effects were still possible. He conceded the point, but then she added that it couldn't be helped, a statement that surprised him. He internally concluded there was no point in arguing with her, while she, for her part, considered his acceptance a positive development. He then apologized to her for causing worry, assuring her that he had now completely remembered his identity as Hermes von Lunicilia. She, however, observed him closely, asking if he wasn't acting differently than usual. Internally, he mused that this memory loss could serve as a convenient excuse for future actions. He attempted to mimic the mannerisms and speech patterns of the original Hermes, striking a dramatic pose. He insisted of Fran that he was the same as always. Confused, she watched as he then requested to be left alone for a bit, wondering to himself if he was exhibiting Chanabu tendencies. She bowed respectfully, stating her understanding and her relief to see him back to normal. He, in turn, was taken aback by her easy acceptance of his performance. Moments later, she informed him that the master awaited him in the dining room and requested he change his clothes before joining. He acknowledged her instructions. Once alone, he let out a sigh of profound relief, then covered his face once more, a blush creeping onto his cheeks. Overwhelmed by the sheer embarrassment of his recent charade, he collapsed onto his bed, burying his face in the pillows. He reflected on his reincarnation into the world of Lovely Sorcerer as a mere background character, wondering if his attempts to act the like a Chiyuni His mind conjured images of the game's true protagonists and their companions. He considered his situation from a different perspective, acknowledging that it was unfortunate he was not the main character of this world. He continued his internal monologue, realizing that as a mere background character, he was free from the duties and destiny that pushed main characters. He could simply enjoy this world he loved, unlike a protagonist who would be forced to follow predetermined scenarios, even if it meant getting close to heroines. As he pondered his new life, he found himself at a desk, looking at a laptop. He wished he could check his status, just like in the game world he now inhabited. Suddenly, a strange sound emanated from the device. To his astonishment, a status screen materialized on the laptop, clearly displaying his own name, Hermes von Lunicilia, along with his gender, age, level, and basic attributes. He immediately recognized it as a game status screen, a sight he had encountered countless times in his previous life. The sudden appearance of the screen left him bewildered, prompting him to question why a background character like himself would possess such a feature. He wondered if it was a special reincarnation bonus, similar to those found in light novels, or if perhaps everyone in this world could access their own status. A congratulatory image of a radiant, goddess-like figure briefly appeared, adding to his confusion. Examining the screen further, he noticed his magic proficiencies were all listed as Novice 10 for every attribute: fire, water, air, earth, holy, and dark. This was peculiar, as the game's original setting dictated that each person typically possessed only one magic attribute. Despite the strangeness, he considered himself lucky, realizing that if he could see his status window, he could better plan his future actions. He continued to analyze his newfound abilities, concluding that a proficiency of Novice 10 meant he could indeed use magic. He then remembered Atlas, the main character of the game, who had possessed an aptitude for all magic attributes, a trait that allowed him to dominate the Magic Academy storyline. A wave of excitement washed over him as he realized he possessed the same magical aptitudes as the game's protagonist. He urged himself to calm down, taking a deep breath before deciding to test if he could truly use magic. With his hands outstretched, he focused his will, attempting to cast a basic wind spell. He called out the incantation, Whirlwind. Immediately, a powerful gust of wind erupted from his hands, coalescing into a massive whirlwind that tore through the room. Papers and objects were scattered violently as the magical vortex demonstrated his undeniable aptitude. He laughed with unbridled joy, a whirlwind of magical energy swirling around him, scattering papers and objects across the room. "This is magic, isn't it?" he exclaimed, his eyes wide with wonder. Still beaming, he held his hands up, marveling at the faint glow emanating from them. I can use magic. "I did it," he declared, a profound sense of accomplishment washing over him. As he gazed at his hands, a warm, unfamiliar sensation coursed through his body. He realized this had to be mana, the very essence of magic, a miracle that had never existed in his previous science-bound world. It was an unknown realm, a profound mystery. He looked out over the sprawling city, a new world stretching before him. He had somehow found himself bound to this realm, a paradise where he could start anew. He could finally enjoy everything, without missing a single part of the world of the lovely sorcerer. There had been so much he couldn't accomplish in his previous life, so many experiences he had missed. Now, with this second chance, he might be able to fully enjoy everything. Overwhelmed with emotion, he clenched his fist in triumph, tears welling in his eyes. "Thank you, God of Games," he cried out. "It all makes me so happy." I'm so happy that some cringy line came out. His joyous celebration, however, was abruptly cut short. A stern voice echoed through the room, and he turned to see Fran, the maid, standing amidst the scattered debris. She chastised him severely, declaring that he was temporarily banned from using magic due to the chaos he had caused. This was how his new life in another world truly began. The young man, Hermes, engaged in a rigorous sword training session, his mind racing with the myriad possibilities and techniques he wished to master. His trainer, a seasoned warrior, cautioned him to be careful and avoid injury, but Hermes, brimming with enthusiasm, simply declared himself ready for anything. Despite his eagerness, Hermes found himself struggling, taking a direct hit that made him wince. He realized that if he continued to take such blows head-on, his hands would quickly go numb, hindering his ability to fight effectively. Even after the blow, Hermes' resolve remained unshaken. His eyes gleamed with fierce determination as he prepared himself for the continuation of the arduous training, eager to push his limits. With renewed resolve, he declared his intention to meticulously copy various techniques before he was to enter the school, ensuring he would be well prepared. His trainer observed him, a silent testament to the intensity of their session. The rigorous practice soon took its toll, leaving Hermes exhausted and gasping for air as he knelt on the ground. Yet, even in his fatigue, he felt a deep satisfaction, realizing that his body still retained the innate memory of how to handle a sword. As he rested, reflecting on the disparity in skill between himself and his trainer, the older warrior announced his departure for work. Hermes acknowledged the vast difference in their abilities, understanding the level he still needed to reach. Soon after, a young maid named Fran approached him, offering a towel to wipe away his sweat. She then inquired if he needed a change of clothes and a spellbook, noting his current state as that of a novice. He confirmed his needs, explaining that he intended to practice some magic after his swordsmanship training. With a playful grin, he asked Fran if she would be willing to clean his room if he made a mess practicing there. With her task understood, Fran promptly declared she would prepare the requested items right away, heading back into the grand house. Hermes left alone, stretched out on the grass, appreciating the beautiful day, which he deemed perfect for practicing both swordsmanship and magic. He thanked Fran, instructing her to return to her duties as he would take his lunch later. Fran, however, expressed an ominous feeling, stating she wished to remain close. She then playfully chided him, remarking that he was such a worrywart and that girls would not simply do his bidding just because he smiled at them. He, appreciating her sentiment, gently told her to focus on her own work. Still, she insisted he call her if anything happened, noting that his maxed-out charm stat was no joke. He, with a slight cough, dismissed her, declaring that he now had the courtyard to himself and it was time for magic. He settled down, ready to begin. He opened the grimoire, a sense of wonder washing over him as he realized he could finally read the intricate texts he had been unable to comprehend when his life was merely a game. He found the information fascinating. The grimoire explained that magic was the act of consuming and controlling the mana circulating within one's body to produce various phenomena in the world, illustrating this with a diagram of elemental affinities including earth, holy, dark, fire, water, and air. It further detailed that there were two branches of magic incantation, which involved forcibly activating it by consuming mana through enchanted incantation, and mana manipulation, where a spell was materialized by manipulating one's mana and visualization. Meanwhile, Fran, having returned, observed him as he struggled to cast a spell. He realized that while incantations were easier to perform, their power could not be adjusted, leading him to wonder if the spell he had witnessed that morning had been a forced incantation. The grimoire clarified that for incantation, mana consumption and damage were fixed based on the level, with a novice incantation consuming 10 mana for 10 damage and an intermediate incantation consuming 30 mana for 30 damage. In contrast, mana manipulation had no classifications like novice or intermediate. By precisely controlling the amount of mana consumed, which could range from 1 to 100, the damage could be finely adjusted. He mused that mana manipulation also appeared to allow for expanding an attack's range and enhancing its effects. With this understanding, he resolved to master mana manipulation no matter the challenge. He began his magic training by circulating mana within his body, imagining it as blood flowing through his veins. Gradually, he gathered it into his hand, successfully forming a small, glowing orb. He noted how perfectly it worked, like a sponge absorbing water, and expressed his amazement at his own talent. Continuing his practice, he then focused on increasing the mana in his hand, causing the orb to expand, before skillfully decreasing it again. He confirmed that imagining the mana as water had been a successful approach to its manipulation. He reveled in the experience, exclaiming that magic was far more enjoyable than swordsmanship due to its inherent flexibility. He likened his mana control to a water performance, where he could adjust the power of his spells at will. His day's practice eventually concluded when Fran arrived to check on him, reminding him that it was getting dark and forcing him to stop. Over the next month, he dedicated his mornings to swordsmanship instruction under his father and his afternoons to studying magic. In just 2 weeks, he had mastered the use of 5 magic attributes, excluding dark magic, preparing himself for enrollment in the Royal First Magic Academy High School. He continued his rigorous training, finally gaining a bare minimum of combat ability. Though his mana consumption remained low and its activation was limited to the palm of his hand, His father considered his progress remarkably fast. A few days later, he reflected that the Magic Academy's entrance ceremony was just 1 week away. Once the event occurred, the game's main plot would finally begin. He realized that once dorm life started, he wouldn't be able to move around freely, making this his only chance to act. Considering the possibility of future incidents, he decided he would head to a dungeon to level up. He resolved to keep his plan a secret from his father and sneak out of the house. A young man, the protagonist, examined a sword he had borrowed from the knights in his father's employ, deeming it suitable. He then tested his personal inventory system, confirming that items placed within it would be stored. He reflected on the convenience of such a system, especially since his status window had been active for 2 weeks, and how it would simplify his preparations for the dungeon. He continued to experiment with the inventory, discovering that time seemed to suspend within it. He found this feature particularly useful, noting that even tea he had stored remained hot for days, a suspension that he was sure would prove invaluable in the future. He later discussed the inventory's properties with Fran, explaining that while he had attempted to infuse magic into it, the energy simply passed through, indicating it lacked the ability to store magical power. He also clarified that only he could interact with the inventory, prompting Fran to playfully question his intellect. As he prepared for his journey, he stored a month's worth of food in his inventory, anticipating that the pantry might run low again and ensuring he would have provisions if he couldn't return for some reason. Fran observed his meticulous preparations. With his preparations complete, he declared it was time to depart for an intermediate dungeon located near the capital, known as the Halls of Lament. He noted that with the servants absent from the grounds, it was the opportune moment to leave. He arrived at the dungeon entrance, a cave located a few minutes' walk from the capital's western gate, noting that it was he remembered from the game. As he stepped inside, he observed that dungeon entrances, though often appearing as simple caves, possessed unique forms and shapes. However, the dungeon entrance quickly transformed, revealing itself not as a cave, but as a gigantic, ominous Japanese-style mansion. He admitted to himself that he was not fond of such horror stuff, finding the real-life manifestation quite horrific. Despite his apprehension, he steeled his resolve, affirming that he could manage this challenge. With renewed determination, he reminded himself that this was a dungeon in another world. After all, he confidently declared that he could deal with anything using his sword and magic, and with that resolve, he stepped through the mansion's doors. He confidently declared his knowledge of the dungeon's layout, derived from his previous life, ensuring he would avoid pointless battles and navigate directly to the monsters. The dungeon's interior, however, had been expanded by the magic of this new world, creating a bizarrely complex structure. As he moved stealthily through the mansion, he soon spotted them, the skeletons standing guard. He knew the area he sought was just ahead, requiring continued, quiet movement. He observed the skeletal warriors, noting their individual weakness as level 1 undead. However, their coordinated movements prevented them from overlapping, making a direct confrontation perilous. He understood that certain routes allowed him to remain undiscovered, and he needed to time his actions precisely. With a sudden move, he engaged one of the skeletons, challenging it to pursue him. He continued to lead the pursuing skeleton, a smirk playing on his lips as he confirmed that this section of the dungeon perfectly mirrored the layout from his game knowledge. Reaching the stairs, he declared that his stun lock was now in place, preparing to unleash his magic. He recalled that holy and fire attributes were most effective against undead monsters, and specifically, the holy attribute should prove particularly potent against skeletons. He concentrated, adding rotation to his magical energy to decrease its overall expenditure while increasing its power, imagining it as a focused bullet. He knew skeletons were resistant to striking, piercing, and slashing attacks, making a magical approach more viable. With a determined cry, he unleashed the concentrated holy magic, a brilliant burst of light erupting from his hand. He watched the skeleton, realizing his magic proficiency was still insufficient, and his current power output was too low. Based on his previous game knowledge, he would require 5 shots of holy magic to fully defeat a single skeleton at his starting stats. A sly smile spread across his face as he decided to keep the skeletons as companions for his experimentation and leveling, confident in his MP's natural recovery rate. He continued his relentless assault, holy magic erupting from his hand to strike the armored skeleton. The undead warrior recoiled, its form flickering under the divine energy, as Hermes pressed his advantage, delivering a powerful kick. He extended his hand, channeling more holy power, a triumphant, almost maniacal laugh echoing through the dungeon as his efforts bore fruit. Moments later, he reviewed his status, a satisfied smile gracing his lips. His level had risen significantly, and his magic proficiencies, particularly holy, had seen a good increase. As he emerged from the dungeon, the world outside seemed to brim with new dangers, yet he felt a growing strength. He considered his father's potential complaints, but dismissed them, knowing his elder sister, a formidable fighter herself, would understand his pursuit of power. Checking his pocket watch, he realized he was running late and needed to return home quickly to avoid an uproar. He walked away from the mansion's dark depths, reflecting on how swiftly he had grown accustomed to the horror-filled ambience. Still, he knew he would need a plausible excuse to slip out of the house again for further training. For the next few days, he maintained a rigorous routine, diligently researching magic at home while finding excuses to continue his dungeon explorations. The day of a significant ceremony finally arrived, marking the beginning of the love source story. He declared his intention to avoid getting entangled in the main events, but admitted his excitement to meet his favorite character, Minerva. Minerva, the main heroine of Love Soar, appeared to be a typical tsundere. However, he knew that following her personal route and raising her affection would reveal an unbelievably sweet and irresistible side, a gap in her personality that he found utterly charming. He acknowledged his role as a mere background character, a mob, and had no intention of pursuing the heroines romantically. Yet, he felt a genuine happiness at the opportunity to witness the girls he once admired, and he resolved to support their romantic journeys. He mused that it would be nice to at least chat with Minerva. With a renewed sense of purpose, he decided it was time to fully embrace his role as Hermes once more. Standing alongside Minerva and the other heroines, he declared, "Let the game begin," his expression a mix of determination and anticipation. As spring arrived, the grand entrance ceremony of the Royal First Magic Academy was set to begin. Hermes von Lunicilia, a mere mob character who had just turned 15, was among those enrolled, much to his own amusement as a fan of this world. He found himself in a carriage alongside the game's main heroines, while his trainer and Fran, his maid, walked beside it. Fran expressed concern, asking if it wasn't faster to walk, but the trainer insisted on his safety. He had decided that a peaceful life was no longer possible. He resolved to master both swordsmanship and magic, aiming to become unparalleled, knowing that even his family expected him to stand out now. Until middle school, Hermes had kept his abilities hidden, leading a quiet life, but those days were clearly behind him. Fran then called out to him, pointing towards a distant structure and exclaiming that they could now see the school building. He mused internally that his sole purpose was to enjoy this world to the fullest, and anything else held no importance. The city stretched out before them, a bustling landscape of grand buildings and cobblestone streets, leading towards the place of his dreams. He gazed up at it, a magnificent structure bathed in sunlight, a sense of awe and anticipation filling his expression. This was the Royal First Magic Academy, a sprawling complex of elegant architecture and manicured grounds, a truly impressive sight. He declared his intention to live in the dorms for next 3 years, bidding Fran farewell. She, however, expressed her concern, stating that if he were to be injured, she would be too worried to sleep. He reassured her, telling her to leave it to him and to take care of herself before quickly departing. As he walked towards the academy entrance, his heart raced with excitement. His first task was to find out which class he was in, a thought that filled him with eager anticipation. He found himself pushing through a massive crowd of students, exclaiming that there were so many people. He struggled to see the class list, calling out for others to get out of his way. He suddenly gasped, his eyes widening as he caught a glimpse of his own reflection in a sparkling, impossibly large eye. The eye belonged to a beautiful young woman, whose presence seemed to shimmer with an ethereal glow. Still reeling from the unexpected sight, he found himself face to face with the main heroine, Minerva. She greeted him with a gentle smile, asking if it was truly him, leaving Hermes utterly overwhelmed by her sudden appearance. This was Minerva von Sunlight, the main heroine of the tale, a sorceress from a ducal house, much like his own. He struggled to form a coherent greeting, managing only a stuttered good morning. Minerva acknowledged the coincidence of their meeting, though she quickly reasoned it was only natural for new students to encounter each other at the academy. Hermes recalled that the Sunlight Ducal House had long served as close aides to the royals, renowned for their unwavering impartiality and sense of justice. With a slight, knowing chuckle, Minerva informed him that he was in Class 1, just like her. She then offered to enlighten him, assuming he had not yet checked his own class assignment. The revelation struck him with profound shock, his face contorting in disbelief as he wondered how such a thing could possibly be. He realized that being in the same class as Minerva, the main heroine, inevitably meant he would also be classmates with the other heroines and the main character of the story. After all, the main characters in Lovesoar had always been in the same class. Minerva expressed her gladness that he was in the same class, noting their houses shared the same noble rank and had often interacted. However, he was consumed by a different thought. He was no longer the only one with an aptitude for all magic attributes. Minerva revealed she was the first person ever to possess such a talent, a fact that had naturally piqued much curiosity. She mentioned hearing about a scholarship student, a commoner, who also possessed similar talents. Hermes immediately identified this student as Atlas, the main character of Lovesoar. Minerva then stated that if Hermes also possessed these talents, her interest in him would only deepen. Hermes was utterly bewildered, questioning if Minerva had always been such a character. She playfully admitted she could not hold back her curiosity, especially concerning someone with the blood of the promising Lunicilia ducal house and such prodigious abilities. He could only stare in stunned confusion. He stumbled back, startled by a sudden collision, and found himself holding a young woman. She seemed flustered and severely shaken, prompting him to wonder if his maxed-out charm stat was the cause, or perhaps their prior acquaintance. He quickly apologized, asking if she had been injured. As he held her, he couldn't help but notice her absurd cuteness, a detail that made him question if such a character had ever existed within the game he knew. He pressed her, stating that she didn't seem fine at all, despite her flustered insistence that she was uninjured. Upon closer inspection, a sense of familiarity washed over him, making him feel as though he knew her somehow. She then explained that she was able to use holy magic, making the treatment of a light wound a simple matter. She introduced herself as Artemis von Asta, and the name immediately clicked for him. He realized she was the daughter of the famed adventurer household, the Asta ducal house. He mused that it was no wonder she seemed familiar, as his father and hers had been schoolmates, making them acquainted. Yet, he found it perplexing that her character's name had never appeared in the game. She then questioned if he could have possibly forgotten her. He quickly offered his apologies to Lady Artemis, clarifying that his intent was only to ensure she wasn't injured, not to trouble her. She, however, insisted she was all right and urged him not to hold back, reminding him of their close connection. She became increasingly agitated, declaring that she was the one who had rudely bumped into him, and that, if anything, at least one of her fingers should have been broken. Her intense reaction left him feeling a little scared. He attempted to bring the conversation to a close, expressing his relief that Lady Artemis was uninjured and admitting his own carelessness. With a sudden burst of speed, she departed, leaving him bewildered by her swift ex-Artemis. Now at a distance, called out to him, suggesting they seize this rare opportunity, leaving him utterly surprised by her proposition. He attempted to make his departure, thanking Minerva for informing him of his class placement, but she seized his arm, expressing surprise that he was in her class. She continued, asserting that of course he was in her class, praising him as a beautiful yet fragile maiden, Lady Minerva, who was a versatile individual capable of using both swords and magic, always ranking at the top of her class. He could only offer a flustered, quiet thanks. He tried once more to excuse himself, but Minerva questioned his intent to run off by himself, reminding him that he would be leaving a beautiful maiden from his own class behind. With a dazzling smile, Minerva then asked if she could bother him for some companionable conversation, declaring that it would be her pleasure. Internally, he felt completely overwhelmed. As the academy day began, the young master, Hermes, walked through the bustling halls, remarking that it was time for class. Beside him, Minerva, ever observant, mentioned a rumor circulating about delicious sweets, her expression softening at the thought. Moments later, they found themselves seated in a classroom, somehow positioned next to one another. A new teacher, Teresa Bernal, stood before the class, calling for everyone's attention. She introduced herself as their homeroom teacher, Teresa Bernal, a sub-character who was the daughter of Viscount and a prodigy, having earned her teaching qualifications at a young age. Hermes noted internally that she possessed affinities for 2 magic attributes, a rare trait given that most individuals typically had only one. Teresa continued, explaining that they would wrap up introductions that day, with classes beginning the following morning. Hermes, however, interrupted, asking about some urgent information he felt everyone needed to hear. Responding to his query, Teresa revealed that there had been several kidnappings in the capital recently, with victims including sons and daughters from noble families. She cautioned everyone to be careful if they planned to go out on their days off. Minerva turned to Hermes, surprised, asking if he had been unaware of these kidnappings. He remained silent, his expression thoughtful, as he processed the unsettling news. She then voiced her shock, exclaiming that such incidents had never occurred in the game, referring to the events that had been unfolding over the last few months. As Minerva continued to express her bewilderment, Hermes internally acknowledged her point, realizing that these indiscriminate kidnappings, affecting everyone from nobles to orphans, were indeed an anomaly. He understood that the darker events of the game were not supposed to begin until the second year's main story, or when an individual character's route was initiated, not during the early stages of academy life, which should have been filled with sparring and romance. He pondered the strange case, wondering if it was an anomaly caused by his own reincarnation into this world. In the worst-case scenario, he considered that he might need to act alongside the protagonist and heroine to keep the main story on track, even if the guards could typically handle such matters. He considered the situation, realizing that in any case, he needed to gather more information. Despite the uneventful entrance ceremony, which concluded without the expected long-winded speech from the principal, he couldn't shake the feeling that he was being inexorably drawn into the unfolding events. He resolved to speak with Mrs. Teresa about it later. Moments later, he approached Mrs. Teresa, inquiring about the kidnapping case and asking if there were any details regarding the culprit's descriptions. She acknowledged him, preparing to answer his questions. Mrs. Teresa explained that the guards had mentioned a skilled swordsman among the perpetrators. The rest of the group, while appearing to be mere thugs, seemed surprisingly well-organized and coordinated. She expressed her concern, stating that while they were safe within the dorms, if the situation outside worsened, it would be dreadful. She wished that the master swordsman Grail Sama were present in the capital. He, however, found himself unable to recall any character like that from the game's original narrative. The master swordsman Grail von Winter was known as the commander of the kingdom's Knight Order and held the title of the strongest swordsman. He was also the biological father of Freya von Winter, one of the heroines. His skill was legendary, capable of single-handedly defeating a level 60 monster, and in Freya's story route, he served as a dependable ally. Mrs. Teresa thanked him for listening and then earnestly warned him to be careful on his days off, especially at night, urging him not to venture out under any circumstances. She then revealed that the master swordsman was currently in the deeper levels of a dungeon and would take some time to return, a revelation that left him with a surprised gasp. She then shifted her focus, stating that for now, she needed to attend to her original duties. As she walked away, he pondered whether teachers, too, could be affected by charm. Later, within the Grand Academy Library, he, Minerva, and Artemis were among the students. He exclaimed with delight, announcing his discoveries. He held up an intermediate spell book with excitement, explaining that its contents primarily focused on the manipulation and control of mana. He marveled at the spells described within, such as firing an arrow from a flaming sphere or freezing the moisture in the air to create an explosion. He was particularly astonished to learn that one could even fly with air magic, prompting a warning to watch his output. He remained engrossed in the intermediate spell book, new ideas swirling excitedly in his mind. However, a frustrating realization dawned on him. He could not check out spell books from the library. He yearned to keep reading, but the rules prevented it. Because of this restriction, he resolved to work on his academic status, focusing on mana manipulation for now. He knew the Common Routes exam would begin in a month, so he would have to keep returning to the library until he could somewhat manage intermediate spells. The next morning, he stretched with a wide yawn, admitting to himself that he wasn't particularly interested in morning classes. Yet, a spark of anticipation ignited within him for the practical sword and magic training scheduled for the afternoon. Today marked the real star of classes. Fran greeted him cheerfully, asking if he had slept well in the dorm. He, meanwhile, was already reviewing his spells, conjuring a small, flickering flame in his palm. He mused that being able to freely use magic was awesome, far surpassing swordsmanship, and he was eager to see other students' spells. As he ate, he inquired if she had prepared his meal, but she clarified that it was made by the academy's resident chef. He then explained that he shouldn't practice magic in his room, as she came to care for him quite often and confirmed that Fran was staying at the academy's servant dorms. Later, dressed in his academy uniform, he smiled confidently at Minerva, assuring her he would do his best to achieve results that would not disappoint her. She returned his gaze, stating she had similar expectations for him and looked forward to witnessing his talents. Their polite exchange concluded as class was about to begin. During the morning classes, which largely consisted of general education akin to what one might learn in middle school, he found himself occasionally intrigued by tidbits of information regarding blacksmithing or magic. His teacher, Teresa, began a world history lesson, explaining that long ago, a war raged between the human and demon realms. A hero ultimately defeated the evil demon lord, saving the human world. She added that the demon world was overrun by monsters and might even contain a demon nation, a fact that, according to Hermes' imagination, explained why the number of monsters never exceeded a certain point. Teresa continued her lecture, clarifying that while the demons possessed stronger bodies, they ultimately lost due to led by the hero. They were driven out of the human world, though not completely wiped out, which was the best the humans could manage. He listened intently, a somber realization settling over him. Even this seemingly peaceful world possessed a blood-stained cycle of history, no different from Earth or other worlds in that regard. He continued to delve into the world's hidden lore, observing information on a digital screen. He noted that while demons were absent from the main plot of Love Soar, a small amount of data regarding them existed on the official archives. Later, in a classroom setting, he listened intently as Teresa explained that the hero who sealed the demon lord had taken a method to break that seal to his grave, never revealing it to anyone. Consequently, the demons themselves remained unaware that their lord was even sealed. He realized this unfolding narrative mirrored the game's original story precisely. He pondered this revelation, noting that while many tales culminated in the demon lord's resurrection, the story of Lovely Sorcerer notably lacked such a development. His gaze hardened as he realized the profound implication. He was likely the sole individual in this entire world who knew its true ending. With this unique knowledge, he faced forward, a new resolve settling upon him, understanding his pivotal role as the Kishin Joker in this unfolding reality. His thoughts were interrupted as Teresa concluded the morning's lessons, announcing that after lunch, the students would proceed to practical sword training. Following Teresa's instruction, Master Swordsman Grail emphasized the importance of punctuality, directing the students to assemble at the first training grounds without delay. Simon Gatiss, a knight and teacher, loudly welcomed the first-year students to the training grounds, declaring that high school would take a more practical approach to combat. Hermes, among the students, found the teacher's booming voice quite overwhelming. Without wasting time, Simon instructed the students to begin practice swings with their greatswords, preparing them for mock battles. The students, including Hermes, responded with a resounding yes as they readied their weapons. After a period of practice, Simon called for them to stop swinging, announcing that it was time to pair up for mock battles. He observed the students, noting that some, like a blonde-haired girl, displayed considerable talent. Hermes, meanwhile, felt an unsettling sensation, as if he were being watched. As the students began to pair off, Hermes found himself without a partner, realizing he was the extra. Simon then declared that Hermes would pair up with a teacher, a prospect Hermes internally dreaded as he was not good at pairing with others. Just as Hermes resigned himself to this fate, Minerva, the blonde-haired girl, approached him, asking if he would like to cross blades with her. Hermes was taken aback, internally recognizing her as Lady Minerva and the game's heroine, realizing this unexpected pairing mirrored a romance arc from his fave game. Meanwhile, another male student with glasses observed Hermes and Minerva, wondering what the main character was doing. He then realized Hermes was talking to a mob classmate, questioning what had happened to the other heroines. Minerva, noticing Hermes' distracted expression, gently asked if something was the matter. Hermes, still processing the situation, stammered a reply, then composed himself, stating he was honored to face her. Minerva, equally polite, expressed her anticipation for their mock battle. With the pairings complete, Simon gave the command to begin the mock battles. Hermes and Minerva stood ready, their practiced swords raised as other students around them engaged in their own duels. The battle between Hermes and Minerva commenced with surprising intensity. Minerva moved with incredible speed, her sword a blur as she pressed her attack. Hermes, caught off guard, struggled to defend himself, his eyes wide with shock as he barely parried her relentless strikes. He continued to struggle, observing Minerva's relentless assault. Her swordsmanship was savage, blindly aiming for his neck, despite her background as the daughter of a judicial officer. Yet, amidst the chaos, a thought sparked within him. He would try mimicking her movements. Minerva, surprised by his sudden shift, paused for a moment. He quickly realized it was simply a sword technique he hadn't learned yet. Minerva, however, scoffed at the idea of him looking down on her, declaring she couldn't allow it as she came in low, aiming for his legs. Their blades clashed with renewed ferocity as Minerva launched herself into the air, her attack a blur of motion. The momentum of the battle had shifted, and Minerva now pressed her advantage, forcing him onto the defense. Suddenly, he mirrored her exact movements, deflecting her attack with a precision that stunned her. She wondered aloud if those were truly her own moves he was using. He inwardly acknowledged his cheat-level specs, realizing that if he exchanged blows with Minerva a few more times, he would grasp her techniques completely. He noted that her thrusts were still too gentle, and when he aimed for a vital spot, his center of gravity shifted. He challenged her to exchange more blows. Exhausted, Minerva finally conceded, admitting she could no longer swing her sword. Hermes, wiping sweat from his brow, let out a sigh of relief. Nearby, other students murmured, impressed by the amazing exchange between Minerva-sama and Hermes-sama. He mused that stealing an opponent's technique during combat was usually dangerous, but he was simply out of the ordinary. A wide grin spread across his face as he realized Minerva's sword techniques excelled at controlling distances. He knew that if he refined a stolen technique, he would become even stronger. This truly rocked. He felt an overwhelming surge of satisfaction, a profound joy in absorbing new experiences and refining them to forge new possibilities. Nothing, he realized, could compare to this exhilarating sensation. As he reveled in his newfound understanding, Minerva, still processing her defeat, reflected that even if they were to fight again, she would likely feel the same frustration. Meanwhile, a fellow student remarked on Hermes' good work, attributing his victory to the difference in their physicality. Hermes, however, internally worried that his true character was showing, while Minerva, from a distance, acknowledged his good work, finding him too amazing for words. Despite his internal conflict, he turned to Minerva, urging her to cheer up. He declared that she should not let this defeat stop her, for being surpassed only meant that no one was truly special, implying that everyone had room to grow. He continued, offering his hand and suggesting they become stronger together. He reminded her that she was still growing and that he himself had not yet mastered her sword techniques. He concluded by asserting that the strong were those who never gave up until the bitter end, and she still had ample room to improve. His words resonated deeply with Minerva, who, with a soft blush, thanked him profusely. She then asked, her voice tinged with hope, if he truly would not abandon her until the very end. He firmly assured her that he would not abandon her, emphasizing that it would be a tremendous waste for her to resign herself and cast aside such talent. Minerva, visibly pleased, playfully squeezed his arm and asked him to look after her from then on. He, slightly flustered, dismissed her playful gesture. Their intimate moment was abruptly interrupted by Simon Gatiss, who loudly admonished them to stop their flirting. Hermes, startled, quickly acknowledged the teacher's command. As the class prepared for the lesson, which would focus on magic, he internally despaired, reminding himself that he was merely a mob character and not supposed to become friends with Minerva. A new teacher, holding a small, flickering flame in her palm, began the magic lesson. She explained that while jumping straight into fighting with magic would be too dangerous, they would start from the basics. She continued her instruction, demonstrating the manipulation of mana, as she asked the students if they had covered such concepts in middle school. She demonstrated her mana manipulation with effortless grace, conjuring a swirling wisp of energy. Hermes observed, acknowledging her skill as befitting a teacher. She continued, explaining that the more mana one possessed, the harder it was to control, a lesson she had learned through extensive self-training. She then instructed everyone to imagine and control their mana, suggesting they form a miniature tornado. Hermes, with a burst of excitement, successfully manifested his own miniature mana tornado. He marveled at the power of magic, eager to explore its full potential and noting the significant force it contained. His curiosity surged, prompting him to consider the potential damage if he were to cease protecting his hands with mana. He recalled how he had learned to cover his hands with mana for protection back in middle school, a technique that, while not strictly magic, served a similar purpose. With a deliberate thought, he released the defensive mana, allowing the miniature tornado to lash directly at his unprotected hand. The impact stung, but he tried to maintain a nonchalant demeanor, hoping to remain inconspicuous. The sting was undeniable, but he quickly realized he could heal the minor injury using holy magic. After a moment, he confirmed that the damage was indeed minimal and easily remedied. His mind raced with new possibilities, eager to try out every idea that came to him. He wondered if he could even use air magic to take flight, preparing to test this new theory with his own body. He launched himself skyward with a powerful burst of air magic. But the exhilaration quickly turned to panic as he realized he had neglected to plan for his descent. He plummeted rapidly, a look of shock on his face. With a surprised cry, he crashed into a large body of water below, sending a massive splash into the air. Soaked but undeterred, Hermes emerged from the water, expressing his gratitude to Mrs. Teresa. He was utterly amazed by the versatility of magic, realizing that with enough control, one could achieve incredible feats. She was visibly upset, her hands clenched as she confronted Hermes. She acknowledged his extraordinary curiosity and talent, but sternly warned him to keep in mind that magic was dangerous. Hermes, sweating slightly, internally conceded that her anger was entirely justified. Sometime later, or perhaps the next day, Hermes found himself eager to finally leave the dorms. It was his first Sunday living there, and he felt as though an eternity had passed. With a determined glint in his eye, he declared his intention to level up at the Halls of Lament today. Dressed in a more formal, ornate uniform, he prepared to depart, reflecting that with his parents absent, he had no need to hide his activities. A young maid approached him, asking where he was headed. Hermes, eager to explore the dungeon, found himself confronted by Fran, who demanded to know his destination. He explained that it was his day off, and he simply desired some time to himself, but with her watchful eye, he felt unable to even step outside. Fran, however, remained unconvinced, questioning the safety of the royal capital and warning him of the risk of kidnapping. He insisted he had permission to go to town and could easily handle any trouble, even offering to beat down anyone who dared to interfere. Still, she firmly denied his request. He sighed, lamenting his inability to relax even on his day off. In response, Fran declared with unwavering resolve that she would accompany him wherever he chose to go, leaving him momentarily stunned. He then took her hands, expressing his deep appreciation for her concern and how touched he was by her worry. She blushed, flustered by his unexpected gesture. But in a swift move, he pulled away, waving goodbye as he made his escape, promising to return by dusk. Fran, caught off guard, could only reach out in surprise as he vanished. Moments later, Hermes bounded through the streets, filled with joyous anticipation for his dungeon adventure, noting it had been a week since his last level up in the corridor of lament. Simon Gatiss, observing from a distance, chuckled, remarking that there was no way Fran could catch him now. Later that night, Hermes stood before a large, traditional building, its eerie silence now familiar to him. He had grown accustomed to the unsettling atmosphere of such places. He pushed open the heavy door, confidently asserting that it was not scary at all, only to find himself face to face with a young woman in a revealing outfit, her back to him. As she turned, revealing a large, round object clutched in her arms, Hermes, recognizing her as Artemis, questioned her presence. She, equally startled, returned the question, asking what he was doing there. She looked back at him, a question in her eyes, as he asked if she, too, was there to level up. He quickly corrected himself, apologizing and rephrasing his question, asking if she had come to the dungeon to get stronger to train. She emphatically denied his assumption, waving her hands in protest, which prompted him to ask for clarification. She then revealed her true purpose, explaining that she was actually searching for a father, who was an adventurer. He recalled the rumors surrounding Count Astor, a renowned adventurer who frequently vanished without a trace, sometimes for as long as a month, and realized that Artemis, his daughter, had journeyed to the dungeon specifically to find him. She then presented him with a crumpled note, asserting it belonged to her father and that its presence here indicated he might be nearby. The note contained a list of intriguing names: Hero's Necklace, Lament Obsidian, Corridor of Lament, Moonlight Blade, and Legend of the Hero. Some of these names were familiar from the world's lore. He remembered a recent class where the teacher had discussed the legend of the hero and mentioned the hero's necklace, Lament Obsidian, and Moonlight Blade as elements within that very story. He expressed his deep concern, stating that this place remained dangerous and that her family, and he himself, would be devastated if anything happened to her. Despite his worries, he ultimately decided to respect her unwavering resolve. Artemis looked on, surprised, as Hermes declared his intention to protect her while she searched for her father, offering his unwavering assistance. She questioned his motives, noting their lack of closeness, but he explained his desire to help, to meet Count Astor, and to understand the mysterious note. He further revealed that his own father had been a classmate of Count Astor at the academy, and he wished to alleviate his father's concerns. With their agreement settled, he extended his hand, and she met it, sealing their pact with a firm handshake. He then smiled confidently, swearing to protect her with his very life. As she walked ahead, Artemis glanced back at him, acknowledging that his protection was now a given after such a declaration. Moments later, Hermes found himself in the thick of battle within a dungeon, swiftly dispatching monsters. He realized his training with Minerva at the academy was proving invaluable, allowing him to level up rapidly, all while Artemis observed from safe distance. He continued his relentless assault, his body already adapting to Minerva's combat forms and movements, executing precise dodges and powerful strikes against the dungeon's inhabitants. After a final, decisive blow, he declared the task complete. A status screen materialized before him, displaying his current statistics. Hermes von Linicella, age 15, level 12, with various magic affinities and a high master swordsman skill, all under Artemis' watchful eye. Artemis gasped in amazement, marveling at how effortlessly he had taken down the monster, while he continued to review his status. He then turned to her, questioning her apparent unfamiliarity with the concept of levels, realizing they had been operating on different understandings. His attention then shifted to a pressure plate on the floor, which he immediately identified as a trap. He had just dispatched another monster with a powerful swing, and Artemis, still startled, offered an apology. He reassured her it was fine, realizing he needed to explain the concept of levels to her. He then gently chided her, noting her lack of combat skill, but quickly added that the immediate danger was past. He clarified that a level served as a measure of one's strength, instructing her to duck as the current enemies were no match for him. Artemis meekly agreed, and he mused internally that despite her fear, her mere ability to confront monsters was commendable. She confessed that while she inherited her adventurer father's robust bloodline and was not physically frail, the sight of a monster still filled her with terror, questioning if her reaction was absurd. She revealed her father was Count Astor. He listened, then internally acknowledged the unfairness of expecting someone not to fear creatures intent on killing them, despite his own detached, game-like approach. He then gently told her not to disparage herself. As they continued their journey, he offered her counsel, asserting that neither talent nor family status defined one's worth. He encouraged her to forge her own unique path, emphasizing that it was her life to live. He then pondered if such a sentiment truly encapsulated a parent's deepest wish for their child's future. Descending a flight of stairs, he looked back at her, offering a protective assurance. If anyone dared to speak ill of her, she need only inform him, and he would deal with them. Her face brightened with a grateful smile, offering him heartfelt thanks. Moments later, they arrived before a grand, ornate door, and he announced their destination. She looked at the imposing entrance, questioning the nature of that place. He explained with a slight smile that it was a monster room, a place where countless creatures would appear. Her eyes widened in shock at the revelation. She voiced her concern, asking if such a place wasn't incredibly perilous. He readily admitted the danger, but quickly reassured her, stating that he was fully prepared for whatever lay within. Without further hesitation, he reached for the grand entrance, announcing his intention to open the door. She gasped in surprise, questioning his sudden decision. He swung the massive doors open, revealing an empty chamber beyond. "There's nothing inside," he declared, much to her confusion. "Wait," she asked, "where are the monsters?" As Artemis pondered the mystery of the empty chamber, Hermes, having confirmed the room was indeed clear, declared his intention to proceed, stepping confidently into the seemingly vacant space. Yet, the moment his foot crossed the threshold, the room erupted into a maelstrom of monstrous forms. Skeletons, goblins, and grotesque beasts materialized from the shadows, overwhelming the space in a sudden, terrifying onslaught. Artemis, witnessing the chaos unfold behind him, could only stare in wide-eyed apprehension. Hermes and Minerva found themselves confronted by a horde of skeletal ninja zombies. Minerva recoiled in terror, but Hermes, observing the undead foes, considered his options, realizing that fire might be the most effective approach against them. He wasted no time, unleashing a focused burst of fire magic directly at one of the charging ninja zombies, striking it with precision. As the flames engulfed the creature, Hermes observed with satisfaction that his strategy was working. The ninja zombies, despite their quick movements, were susceptible to fire, quickly acquiring a burn status. He further explained that the burning effect would spread to any other monsters the afflicted zombies touched. With a confident grin, he prepared to amplify his attack, declaring his intent to add wind magic to the inferno, while Minerva looked on, overwhelmed by the escalating chaos. With a powerful surge, he unleashed the combined force of fire and wind, creating a swirling vortex of flames that engulfed the remaining enemies. Minerva instinctively crouched, shielding herself from the intense magical assault. He then checked his status, a pleased expression on his face, as he saw the results of his combat. However, he also noted that continuing such powerful attacks might prove dangerous in the long run. Moments later, Hermes confidently opened a door, declaring his strategy perfect and asserting that his level would continue to rise with such effective tactics. Minerva, still recovering from the intense battle, called out to him with a hint of concern. Minerva expressed her apprehension, asking if everything was truly all right, as the room had appeared to be entirely consumed by fire. Hermes, with a reassuring smile, simply told her to look. He stood in the doorway, revealing a perfectly normal room beyond, devoid of any fire damage. He calmly explained that such rapid environmental resets were typical for a dungeon, and Minerva, seeing the evidence, finally understood. He explained that the monsters had reset, a common occurrence in dungeons, but Minerva, still reeling from the intensity of the dungeon's mechanics, found it a strange place. She pressed him for more details, but he advised her that some knowledge was better left unknown. Even as Minerva's voice startled him more than the monsters themselves, he remained focused, declaring that more enemies were approaching. He laughed, telling her they would continue to farm the monsters to gain experience before resuming the search for her father. Later, standing atop a rugged cliff face, he noted that his efforts had been worthwhile, as his level had risen to 18. However, the sun had already begun to set, casting long shadows across the landscape, signaling the end of their day's exploration. As the evening deepened, Minerva looked downcast, and he confirmed their lack of progress, admitting they had found no trace of Count Astor. She confessed that while she knew from the start that finding her father so soon would be unlikely, the reality of finding nothing still brought a pang of sadness. He turned to her, urging her to dismiss such negative thoughts. Despite the lack of concrete evidence, he firmly believed that her father was safe. Minerva, her spirits lifted by his reassurance, agreed with him, realizing that not giving up was the most important thing. She then addressed him with a respectful honorific, acknowledging his support. He reiterated his commitment to her, promising to always help and insisting that she never venture into the dungeon alone again. Minerva, visibly touched and grateful, enthusiastically agreed. As they returned to the town, Hermes walked with a thoughtful expression, and Minerva offered him a sincere thank you before they parted ways. Moments later, a piercing scream echoed through the street. He reacted instantly, his hand flying to the hilt of his sword, his eyes wide with alarm as he prepared for whatever new danger had emerged. He sprinted through the city streets, his sword drawn, the piercing scream still echoing in his ears. He had heard it clearly, a cry for help that demanded immediate action. Upon arriving at the scene, he found a horrifying sight. Minerva and Fran lay unconscious on the ground, while two masked figures stood menacingly over them, their presence a clear threat. One of the masked assailants immediately lunged, but he deftly dodged the attack, countering with a swift kick that sent the attacker reeling. He then unleashed a surge of dark elemental magic, a powerful force he called Nightmare, which erupted from his hand, catching his opponent off guard. The masked figure cried out in pain, clutching their eyes as the dark magic took effect, leaving them vulnerable to his continued assault. Despite his fierce resistance, he was eventually overwhelmed and fell to the ground, injured. The masked figure stood over him, calmly stating that they were merely a trespassing citizen, a claim that felt deeply deceptive. Moments later, he struggled to his feet, his gaze immediately falling upon the still unconscious Minerva and Fran, his concern overriding his own injuries. He quickly checked on them, letting out a sigh of relief as he realized they had only fainted. He recognized the other unconscious person as Minerva's maid, Fran, and was glad they were unharmed. Fran began to stir, slowly regaining consciousness. As her eyes fluttered open, she saw Hermes, her expression shifting to confusion as she questioned why he was there, unaware of the recent events. Hermes stood over the bound figures of two masked attackers, explaining to a surprised Minerva that he had been close by and neutralized them. He added that he had also retrieved the blanket and ropes from his inventory. Minerva, still processing the events, turned to him, her face flushed with embarrassment and gratitude. She apologized for not thanking him properly sooner, expressing immense relief that he had saved her and she was unharmed. He simply acknowledged her safety. He then directed her attention to another figure, indicating that Fran was lying over there. Minerva rushed to Fran's side, embracing her tightly with a sigh of profound relief, overjoyed that her friend was safe. Still holding Fran, Minerva vowed to repay her debt to Hermes, swearing by her house. He calmly informed her that he had already healed Fran's wounds with holy magic and that she should wake soon. Minerva, her cheeks still flushed, praised him, comparing him to a fairy tale prince. He, slightly flustered by the compliment, insisted she owed him nothing, explaining he acted purely out of a desire to help. He then added, with a hint of pride, that as the son of a duke, he desired nothing he couldn't obtain with his own hands. He internally mused that such praise felt embarrassing for someone who had lived an ordinary past life, while she continued to blush, her thoughts drifting to the stories she had adored as a child. Suddenly, Minerva, flustered and waving her hands, quickly clarified that she did not mean he was exactly like a prince from those stories. He looked at her, confused, asking what had happened. Deeply embarrassed, she insisted that it was not as if she still read children's picture books, emphasizing that those were from her past, from when she was little. Minerva, still flustered, tried to retract her earlier effusive praise, explaining that she was merely referring to the books. Hermes, understanding her embarrassment, found her reaction endearing and decided to keep his amusement to himself. He then escorted her back to her residence, where she thanked him for his assistance. He casually dismissed her gratitude, stating it was only natural and reflected on leaving the captured bandits to the guards, confident she would be safe. As he walked away, Hermes found himself pondering the recent Minerva's kidnapping incident, a thoughtful expression on his face. The sun began to set over the city, casting long shadows as Hermes considered the events. This incident, he realized, was far beyond anything he had anticipated, even though he had successfully intervened. He continued his solitary walk, his mind racing. In the early stages of the game, love-sore Minerva, the heroine, was never kidnapped, not even in her individual story route. He mused that it might be a hidden scenario, something the game never explicitly showed because the heroine herself never mentioned it. But regardless, he found it profoundly strange. Still, despite the possibility of a hidden plot, he harbored a very bad feeling about the entire situation. He could only hope that the men he had handed over to the guards would reveal something useful during their interrogation. He continued to mull over the situation, deciding it would be best to wait for an official report rather than acting alone. Suddenly, a chilling sensation washed over him, and his eyes snapped open in alarm. A bead of sweat trickled down his temple as he instinctively moved, sensing something unsettling that compelled his body to react. He scanned the rooftops, wondering if his senses had deceived him, if it was merely his imagination. But no, he quickly dismissed the thought. He looked around, confirming that no one was visibly present in the area. Yet, he remained convinced that the sickening, icy gaze he had felt could not have been a figment of his imagination. A profound sense of unease settled over the capital, a premonition of something truly dire looming on the horizon. Unseen, a cloaked figure observed the city from a rooftop, acknowledging Hermes' sharp perception, a slight chuckle escaping him. He mused that Hermes, also known as Hermes von Lunicilia, possessed exceptional magic talent, much like the girl who had recently been taken. Such a talent, he considered, might prove useful for their grand plan. However, his detection ability was proving troublesome. The cloaked figure worried that Hermes' keen senses could expose their entire operation. Considering this, he decided it would be best to utilize Harold and the others for the task, as his own primary objective was simply to capture Minerva. Meanwhile, Hermes stood amidst a bustling crowd of students, his expression thoughtful as he processed the strange events unfolding around him. He reflected on the protagonist's actions, which diverged wildly from the game's scenario, and Minerva, the main heroine, being abducted, an event he knew to be utterly impossible within the original plot. Added to this was the lingering presence of something profoundly abnormal. As he looked at a classroom sign, a voice greeted him, but his mind was consumed by the stark realization this world was fundamentally different from the one he remembered. Suddenly, Minerva appeared, waving cheerfully, seemingly unharmed. Hermes stared in disbelief, wondering why she was attending school after her near-kidnapping just last night. Minerva, beaming, thanked him profusely for his help the previous day, explaining that thanks to him, she was unharmed and her father had granted her permission to attend school. She acknowledged his concern about arresting, but insisted she was a student and belonged there, reiterating her gratitude. He listened as Minerva, covering her mouth with a hand, explained that convincing her weeping father had been no small feat. He had thought Duke Sunlight would be worried sick about her, and wondered if she had truly resorted to punching her own father. She then pouted, stating her desire to see him was the reason she had gained permission to attend school. She asked if that was not a good enough reason, while he, smiling, considered that she had come just to thank him. He internally mused that if it were any other girl, such a statement would sound like a lie, but coming from the main heroine, he found it hard to believe. Minerva, sensing his skepticism, called him surprisingly rude and dense. He suggested she could have waited a few days to rest before returning to school. Minerva, looking surprised, countered by asking if it wasn't natural to want to see the face of her savior, causing him to react with a sharp gasp of shock. Before he could elaborate, Minerva covered his mouth with her hand, telling him that a gentleman should simply smile and let things slide, and that nitpicky men were generally disliked. She continued, explaining that she had been saved thanks to him, and her parents were also deeply grateful, having sent word that they would properly express their thanks later. He noted their dutiful nature as nobles. Later that day, during combat practice, she greeted everyone with a cheerful demeanor. He observed her, noting that she was acting as lively as if the kidnapping incident had never even happened. She then engaged him in a spar, easily deflecting his attack. She remarked that he had grown much stronger in just a single day, prompting him to wonder if it was because he had trained in the dungeon on his day off. She then swiftly kicked him away. He, holding a practice sword, advised her that if she intended to go to the dungeon, she must be sure to get permission and go with guards, emphasizing that it would be a problem if she died. She, also holding a practice sword, agreed, wondering if she would also grow stronger by doing so. She assured him she would not do anything reckless. He then asked, surprised if that was what she had done as well, before admitting that he too had trained in the dungeon. He sighed, stretching his arms, lamenting the many troubles that plagued him that day. He then questioned the sincerity of Minerva's newfound strength, wondering if she truly intended to venture into the dungeon with the protagonist. Moments later, a maid approached him, presenting a formal letter. He accepted it, recognizing the distinctive crest of the Sunlight House. Fran, now by his side, read the contents aloud. The Sunlight House expressed gratitude for his assistance to Minerva and extended an invitation to a tea party on Sunday. Upon hearing this, he realized the implications. Since his own father had also been invited, refusing the invitation would be impolite, effectively preventing him from going to the dungeon. Fran confirmed his suspicions, explaining that the Sunlight House and his father were old friends, and his father would undoubtedly be delighted to attend such an event. He instructed Fran to bring him pen and paper, intending to write a reply to Duke Sunlight. He reasoned that if he could learn more about the kidnapping, enduring the tea party for a single day would be a worthwhile endeavor. Meanwhile, Minerva walked along a paved path, a formal letter in her hand. She mused that despite being in the same class as Hermes, the formality of the invitation felt distinctly noble-like. Hermes inquired about Artemisia's continued search for clues regarding her father, to which she affirmed her intention to visit the Dent, a location renowned for its suitability in training both magic and sword skills. He found her plan agreeable. He then suggested they venture together to the final boss area, reasoning that while an intermediate dungeon boss was beyond their current capabilities, a beginner dungeon boss would only be around level 30. She reacted with a surprised gasp. Despite his reassurance, she hesitated, expressing her reluctance to trouble him any further and questioning if his offer was truly acceptable. He merely offered a gentle smile, clearing his throat. He then asserted that she could rely on him completely, encouraging her to bother him as much as she desired. Flustered by his directness, she stammered his name. Just then, Minerva appeared, observing the pair with a scrutinizing gaze before directly asking Hermes about his activities. Artemisia, visibly mortified, internally protested the public display. Hermes, however, calmly declared he was merely making a secret promise with Artemisia, a revelation that utterly shocked her. Minerva, her expression hardening, immediately challenged his assertion of merely helping Artemisia, demanding further explanation. She pressed even closer, her face mere inches from his, demanding to know the precise nature of his assistance to Artemisia. Hermes, flustered by her proximity, noted her pleasant scent and felt his heart pound. Minerva, sensing the precariousness of the situation, insisted he explain everything thoroughly, deeming it dangerous. Hermes apologized to Minerva, explaining that he could not divulge the specifics due to Artemisia's privacy and requested her understanding. Minerva conceded the point, but then Hermes suddenly realized he was still holding Artemisia's hand, prompting an internal sigh of exasperation. Minerva then called out to Hermes, who inquired about her needs. She affirmed his earlier point and suggested they escort Artemisia to the classroom, as the bell was expected to ring at any moment. Later, in the classroom, Artemisia held an invitation to a tea party from Duke Sunlight. She explained that such formal invitations were a matter of noble etiquette, yet she pondered why the Duke, being in the same class, couldn't simply convey the message directly. She confirmed her attendance at the tea party, explaining it was also a gesture of thanks for Hermes saving her. Hermes, though finding the formality a bit much, was captivated by her cuteness, recalling his surprised reaction when he first read the invitation. He reflected on his previous life, where he had never faced a single criminal, and how quickly he had become a hero, just a month after reincarnating, finding the situation akin to a light novel title. She praised him as the hero who saved a duke's daughter, making him feel a sense of pride. Upon their arrival, the magnificent Sunlight Palace loomed before them. She welcomed him, announcing their presence at the grand estate. He remembered a previous visit to the Sunlight Duke house for a winter party, noting how the unusual snow had created a dreamlike scene. He reminded himself to remain calm, recognizing the Sunlight Duke house as one of the oldest noble families, even more ancient than the Lunicilia house. She then expressed a desire to see the snowy scenery with him again. He internally noted that this was a crucial event for the Lovegir's first year, and as a mob character, he must not intervene, dismissing the idea of winter being dangerous. With a sense of urgency, she urged him to hurry, explaining that her father and the others were eagerly awaiting their arrival. He acknowledged her request. As they entered Duke Sunlight, a boisterous man with a prominent mustache and beard heartily welcomed Hermes, expressing his sincere appreciation for his attendance at the tea party. Minerva's father stood nearby, offering a subtle smile. He noted that Duke Sunlight's voice was loud, and that he didn't resemble Minerva. The Duke then complimented him, stating he always resembled Duke and Madame Lunicilia and was beautiful. The Duke continued, asking if he had a hard time with women, given his looks. He politely denied it, though he internally acknowledged the Duke as a great man whose presence never made people uncomfortable. Meanwhile, Minerva's father greeted Minerva, remarking that she grew brighter by the day. She responded, stating that hearing such words gave her confidence. Hermes internally concluded that his own Chinibiu tendencies were definitely inherited from his father, finding him flashy. The tea party continued, with Duke Sunlight reminiscing about his youth, noting how much he had aged since his student days. Artemisia, ever graceful, complimented the Duke and his wife on their enduring beauty, stating she could only be envious. Minerva's father interjected, suggesting they discuss his daughter before delving too deeply into old tales. As the pleasantries continued, the Duke acknowledged the suggestion, then turned to Hermes, inviting him to finally take a seat. Once seated, the Duke expressed his profound gratitude to Hermes for saving Minerva, stating that without his intervention, his daughter's fate would have been dire. Minerva's father, standing nearby, agreed, acknowledging that Minerva's safety was entirely thanks to Hermes. The mention of the kidnapping reignited Minerva's father's fury, and he cursed the criminals, vowing to personally exact revenge. He questioned Hermes, asking if he had forgotten how close he himself had come to being captured. Hermes, calmly sipping his tea, affirmed his intent to eliminate the criminals, but stressed the immediate need for more information, particularly regarding the identities of those who had targeted Minerva. Hermes internally noted the Duke's carefree demeanor, observing that he was worse than a sly fox, a hot-blooded man who always acted cool. The Duke, catching Hermes' gaze, apologized with a slight smile. The conversation shifted to the broader implications of the incident. Hermes, addressing Duke Sunlight, inquired if the recent events were connected to the kidnappings. The Duke confirmed they were likely related, though he couldn't be entirely certain. Hermes realized there was indeed someone else involved, a mastermind behind the operation. The Duke speculated that the perpetrators either had numerous members or an expert among them, and Hermes vowed to kill the mastermind once he found the Duke continued, revealing that he had heard of a capable swordsman among the kidnappers. Minerva's father added that a female spear user was also by his side, a detail that had stuck in his mind due to its rarity, as such a job never existed in the game. The Duke agreed, emphasizing the importance of sharing this information with the students for their protection, given that children were targeted. Hermes then asked about magic, and the Duke explained that the information he had gathered about those Hermes had caught a line with what he had heard at the academy. The kidnappers were making a list of those with magic. The season for this was still unknown. The Duke further elaborated, stating that the kidnappers had searched for orphans or commoners not registered with the kingdom, and while someone supposedly wanted the list, the truth of that claim remained uncertain. He noted the kidnappings seemed to have happened in a hurry. Hermes, observing two students passing by, found it strange that the list would include even noble academy students. He realized the situation was dire, a massive, hidden scheme unfolding behind the kidnappings. If the criminals' objective was truly as they suspected, then he, with his exceptional magical talent, would undoubtedly become target. Minerva's father, observing him, voiced his own concern, acknowledging the danger Hermes faced. As the discussion continued, Minerva, with a determined expression, suddenly announced she had a clever plan. Hermes and Minerva's father looked at her in surprise, with Hermes quickly telling her not to utter such trivialities. She then proposed that if she too was a potential target, it would be best for her to remain constantly by Hermes' side. Minerva elaborated, explaining that if they always acted together, they could assist each other in case of an attack. Hermes reacted with utter shock, demanding she explain herself immediately. Minerva's father, however, considered the idea, finding it not entirely without merit. Minerva's father mused that she was clearly trying to get closer to Hermes. He acknowledged that Hermes possessed sufficient strength to protect her, and Minerva herself could wield magic, making them capable of supporting one another. Hermes vehemently objected, arguing that a young woman spending all her time with a man could severely damage Minerva's reputation. Duke Sunlight, however, found the idea favorable, noting that having both ducal guards present would reduce costs. Hermes continued his protest, asserting that such an arrangement was practically akin to being lovers, and if they were always together, they would only become easier targets. More than anything, he declared he did not want to lose his freedom. Minerva, her expression crestfallen, asked if Hermes truly did not wish to be with her. Hermes, flustered, tried to calm her, insisting he had said no such thing. She then pressed further, asking if he considered her a burden, and if he would rather be with Artemis. Minerva concluded by stating she did not want to trouble Hermes. Hermes, his face slightly flushed, softly called her name. Minerva, also blushing, confessed her worry for him, and expressed her belief that staying close to him would alleviate that feeling. Duke Sunlight, wiping tears from his eyes, declared his profound understanding of Minerva's feelings. Minerva's father, however, remained steadfast in his opposition. Despite this, Duke Sunlight turned to Hermes, entrusting Minerva to his care and demanding he protect her, making an exception as her father. Hermes was utterly stunned by the Duke's unexpected acceptance of the proposal. Minerva's father looked on, clearly annoyed. Hermes, exasperated, internally lamented how excessively Duke Sunlight spoiled Minerva. He realized that, for the first time in his life, he felt an overwhelming urge to strike someone's father, still reeling from the Duke's unexpected decision. Hermes could only offer a weak protest, attempting to negotiate a reprieve, but ultimately conceding with a resigned sure. Artemisia, however, beamed with a triumphant smile, her hands clasped together, remarking on the acceptance of her proposal. She then declared that this meant she and Hermes would now spend more time together, a statement Hermes internally recognized as a deliberate act of manipulation.